Oh my God, I am so excited to be up here on this stage at my first React Conf, seeing sort of all of your bright, excited faces and maybe a little sleepy like back there, but it's okay. It's the end of the day, I understand. But I'm especially excited to tell you all about one of my favorite topics, which is cross-platform React. But before we do that, let's go back in time and review how the story started. Imagine you are at React Conf 2015, and I know some of you were there, so you can keep me honest. So by this point, React is already pretty popular. Introduced just 2 years earlier, it had demonstrated the power of a declarative UI programming model. React was awesome for building UIs in the web. But this is 2015, and native mobile apps are becoming increasingly more important. Of course, you can write a React web app and ship it on native with a wrapper, but that comes with some downsides. Performance is probably worse. User interactions don't feel quite right, and the app just doesn't really look and feel right on the native platform. But native development was challenging in its own way. You have to staff 2 full teams of iOS and Android engineers to maintain 2 separate code bases and 2 separate infra stacks. Is just really expensive. So it's against the backdrop of this that React Native was introduced, promising to combine the power and performance of native development with the intuitive UI declarative programming model of React. It presented a vision for building UIs across platforms without having to learn platform-specific tech stacks. We weren't aiming for a single shared code base, but rather a consistent programming model. It wasn't write once, run anywhere, but learn once, write anywhere. So Meta thought this is a pretty compelling approach to native app development, and we have since shipped React native experiences across a broad range of our own first-party apps. And many others thought so as well. As you saw in the keynote earlier today, the React Native community is large and continues to grow. And many companies, from tiny startups to large corporations, have come to rely on React Native to create their most important user experiences. In addition, since its initial release on mobile, React Native has scaled to many additional platforms. You heard about some of them earlier today during the Amazon talk. Of course, there's also macOS and Windows, originally created by Microsoft, where we still have a very strong partnership with them, and most recently, VR. This has continued to confirm that the React programming model is a compelling way to develop user interfaces anywhere. So we must be done, and React Native is perfect and cannot be improved, right? And I can probably just walk off the stage and give you some time back. I know you want to go home, but we still have another 15 minutes to go. And unfortunately, we're maybe not quite done yet. So you've heard over the past couple of days about many improvements made to React Native over the years, including a major redesign called the new architecture, which addressed some fundamental limitations of the original design. But there's something else limiting the potential of React Native. During the keynote earlier today, you heard about the Meta Quest Store, which is a cross-platform app that is available on mobile, web, and VR. Now, if this experience weren't built using React, you would need 4 separate teams of iOS, Android, VR, and web engineers maintaining 4 separate code bases and 4 separate infra stacks. So your development costs would scale linearly with each new platform. Having this experience being built with React across these platforms means that engineers can move between them more easily. You can share more of the infra and business logic code. And the cost of development scales much better than linear. But we should be able to do even better. Because today, none of the web and native UI code for these experiences is actually shared. And while the UI isn't identical, the design language is really similar, and the structure of the apps is almost the same. There are a lot of common shared components. We don't want to get to 100% code sharing, because experiences should look and feel custom to each platform. But what we found at Meta is that teams often spend the bulk of their time on repetitive reimplementation work, and then they don't have as much time on actual customizations that make the experience feel really bespoke to each platform. So what's stopping people from sharing UI code easily today? Well, the original design of React Native was all about taking inspiration from the best of the web. But taking inspiration meant diverging, sometimes intentionally and sometimes incidentally, from the standard. And what you got was an API that felt and looked similar, but behaved differently and was different in very subtle and sometimes unexpected ways. What you got was essentially one more standard. And this standard proved to be the barrier between code sharing between web and native. Now, there have actually been solutions built for solving this. Some of you may be familiar with React Native for web. If you have used Expo and shipped your experience on the web, you've used React Native for web. It's a user space library designed to let you run React Native code on the web. Very popular, but it's built on top of the same non-standard React Native API, which means that it has to do a lot of work to bridge between that API and the web API, which means performance compromises on web. It also forces web experiences into using the React Native API, which is less natural and expressive for web development. So what if, instead of building solutions on top of React Native, we considered a more fundamental change to React Native itself? What if, instead of being simply inspired by web the good parts, we move to align with the web by default? So concretely, this means that over time, the React Native API surface will evolve to look and behave more like the web. You will see roughly 3 categories of changes. So for existing APIs, you will see changes in shape and behavior, so they look a little bit closer to their web counterparts, ideally as close as possible. But we will also add brand new capabilities to React Native from the web that will allow you to do things that were difficult or impossible before. Later in the talk, you will see examples of all of these changes. But before we jump into additional details, let's cover some design principles. Those of you who are familiar with React Native know that one of the most fundamental principles of React Native is matching people's expectations for each platform. This principle is not changing. React Native will still render platform UI primitives and allow you full access to the native platform APIs. Anything you can do in native, you'll continue to be able to do with React Native. But now, additionally, we want developers to share code that should be shared, saving them time for meaningful platform differentiation. We don't want developers to spend their time rewriting the same platform-agnostic code again and again. This is the inefficiency we're going after. And finally, we will align with web standards by default while still supporting platform-specific paradigms. So for example, on Android, there's a unique elevation API that produces shadow effects, but it doesn't map cleanly to web shadow APIs. Similarly, there are materials APIs on iOS and Windows that produce cool effects like frosted glass that are also not simply represented by web blur APIs. So we're not going to try to shoehorn those together or kind of map them awkwardly to each other. You'll still have access to these platform APIs through React Native. So as we move React Native in this direction, how is development going to change? Most importantly, you will see significantly more code sharing across web and native experiences. It's always been possible to share some business logic, and a lot of React and React Native apps share code in this way today. But UI code always had to be distinct. And this is something that's going to begin to change as we move toward the web standard. But aligning with the web will also further increase skill transferability between React and React Native. It's already pretty good, but still, for someone coming from web who's brand new to React Native, they have to learn a lot. So what we're hoping is a reduced learning curve for those folks. And for people who frequently move between React and React Native development, we hope to see increased development experience consistency. For example, today, React Native offers the Flexbox API. It should be so convenient. You would think that it would work just the same way as it does in the web, except for most of the defaults and also some of the behaviors. Our goal is to reduce these differences as much as possible so developers don't have to remember how to work around them, and we don't have to have these kinds of warnings in our documentation. So I've been talking about this direction as if it were theoretical, but actually, we've already begun some of this work. During the keynote earlier today, you heard about an experience called Account Center, which is a product used to manage your linked Instagram, Facebook, and Horizon accounts. Something that distinguishes Account Center from the Meta Quest store is that its UI code is actually largely shared. It's one code base, one theme, and it ships to web and VR. And there are no web views here. This is React in the web, React Native in VR. Of course, the code is not 100% the same, but that is not our goal. There should always be some bespoke code to enable platform-specific differentiation in capabilities. But we have gotten a lot closer with Account Center, and we've observed just a massive productivity boost for engineers. Now, to detail some of the specific work that has made this possible, here's my colleague, Naman Goyal.